to say whether it's a men. Oh, interrupt that just to tell you guys that we are live, and I want to say hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. I am Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I am your host for today. Authors Love Bookstores is a weekly online program held on Wednesday afternoons. I host and produce along with my partner, friend, and fellow writer, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence. Our goal is to highlight indie bookstores across the US and Canada, to tell you what makes them so special, and to talk about what you can do to support their continued survival. If you are with us live on Facebook, please feel free to put a question in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can. And now, today, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Tom Perotta to Authors Love Bookstores. Tom, for anybody who doesn't know, is the best-selling author of 9 works of fiction, including Election and Little Children, both of which were made into Oscar-nominated films, and The Leftovers, which was adapted into a critically acclaimed Peabody Award-winning HBO series. His other books include Bad Haircut, The Wishbones, Joe College, The Abstinence Teacher, 9 Inches, and his newest, Mrs. Fletcher. His work has been translated into a multitude of languages. Tom grew up in New Jersey, as did I, and lives outside of Boston. And he's joining us to talk about one of his favorite independent bookstores, Newtonville Books, located in Newton, Massachusetts. Hello, Tom. Thank you for being here with us.
Oh, hey, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
Also with us is Mary Cotton, co-owner of Newtonville Books. Welcome, Mary. It's so good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Tom, for picking us.
My pleasure, Mary.
Well, let's dive right.
Yeah,
Let's dive right into that, because Tom, we're here because you selected Newtonville Books as one of your favorite independent bookstores. I am sure that you have visited many, many indies over the years. So I would love it if you would just tell us a little bit about what makes Newtonville special and why you love it so much.
Yeah, well, let me just start by saying that I live in Belmont, Massachusetts, so that very close to Cambridge, and I am, living in kind of probably the best part of the country for independent bookstores. I mean, they're at least 4 or 5, in fact, there's one right down the street, Belmont Books, that I love as well. It's just an embarrassment of riches for book lovers in this area. But Newtonville Books is really close to my heart. And I think especially now in this particular COVID moment, the idea of a bookstore as a meeting place, a place that connects readers, that connects writers. I think the store has just done an unparalleled job of doing that. And it's a small store with a great selection. The books are very curated, but for me, like at the heart of it are the events. And Newtonville is just a great place to go to an event. It's pretty intimate. Sometimes they'll get really big writers. They'll get Stephen King or Colson Whitehead, and we'll have to go to a bigger spillover place, and that's fun. That's a big event. But you'll often get just great writers. And the room is packed with 40 or 50 people who really want to be there, and there's just a sense of excitement and community that I think is almost like the essence of literary community as I experienced as an adult. It's different if you're young and in college, there's a community there. But I think when you're an adult, a good local independent bookstore like Newtonville Books becomes like the center of literary culture.
I think that's so true. I love the way that you say that. And the events are fabulous. I know I first met Christopher Castellani at Newtonville Books when he was going around for Leading Men. Mary, I would love for our viewers to hear a little bit about Newtonville Books kind of from the inside. So I'm just gonna set up a couple of questions for you as a bookseller.
Awesome.
And Tom has done a great job of teeing up the first one, which is I would love to hear about the most memorable live event you have had in the store.
Well, thank you, Tom, for all your kind words. And Tom has been a big feature of many of our events. So we've been lucky enough to host him many times. And we have had a great time with events. I miss it so much. Like during this, you really feel the loss of it. And so I appreciate all the work you guys have done at A Mighty Blaze to sort of recreate a little. So thank you for doing that sort of while while we can't. And so many other bookstores have been busy with Zoom events and things as well. We're just sort of waiting till we can have people back again and can't wait. But there's been so many great events. I love it, especially when there are two authors who are together. Like we had sometimes, and sometimes we've had a couple authors who can play the guitar. And so they'll come with their guitar, like John Wesley Harding
Oh,
and
really?
Leslie Stace. Yeah. And so it obviously changes like the concept of an event, like a book reading, when you have this other thing that's involved. And so, guitars aren't required, but it's super fun when we get to do them. And we've had many authors over the years. I think there's a lot of authors who are guitar players. Tom, you haven't played the guitar for us, have you?
No, I haven't, but don't tempt me.
I know. I mean, maybe if you played something right now, that would be. But
I didn't know I was allowed, but
Oh, you're definitely allowed. You're definitely
I'll bring
allowed.
the whole band.
maybe our first event back will be Tom doing a reading with a guitar. So
You know,
that would be
Oh,
ideal.
God, I love it.
That actually is a good segue into, one of the events that Newtonville Books is very involved with is a series called Earful, which actually does bring writers and
So
musicians
fun.
together. And it's been in various other places. Right now it's in Watertown, sometimes at a restaurant, sometimes in a theater.
Mhm.
And, that's been great too. I think it's one thing to say, okay, here's a bookstore, here's a literary community, and then
Right.
here's like a fun night out that is like really entertaining, that brings different audiences together. That the store has also been, I think, really proactive in creating that kind of community.
Yeah, I think some people think of literary events as, these very like structured things where you'll be in your chair listening to someone stand at a podium and, lecture or read to you. And so, but really what it is, and sometimes that's part of it, but when you have an author there who can connect with the people in the audience, who sometimes we would have people who maybe they hadn't been to a book reading before, so they didn't even know what it was going to be. But there's just all kinds of opportunities for connection and so I love the Earful series is fantastic because it sort of takes the pressure off people when there's music and books. And there's usually drinks there as well, which makes everybody happier. So I'm glad that there are a lot of
It's the whole
different
lost
ways.
world, Mary.
Oh, it sounds fabulous. It sounds so great. I wish we could do that right now.
I know, right?
Oh, man. Mary, one of the really special things about indie bookstores in general, and I think this is true of Newtonville Books in particular, based on my visits to the store, is that you can go in and you can get a really good book recommendation. I mean, in a way that you can't at like a big box store, you definitely can't do with an online retailer, that you can come and you can sort of talk to somebody, you can talk about what you like, what you've read recently that you like, what your tastes are, and you can get like a really good recommendation and get matched up with a book that you wouldn't have otherwise found. And I'm always kind of amazed with the way booksellers are able to do that. What is the art of making a good book recommendation?
Well, first of all, we have so much fun making book recommendations. So I think it's the best part of our job. And so when someone comes in and they're like, I'm looking for something, I like this, it's like our sweet spot. We love it. It's great. It's like, okay, I've got this. So I miss that. But really what it's about is listening to the customer and just really trying to hear what they're saying, because they might not talk about books in the same way that we talk about books. And so they might even just be able to say, I really like this. I don't know why, I just did. And so you take what they give you and you see what you can do with it. And so a lot of times when I'm recommending in the bookstore to someone in person, this is what I miss too. You can just walk over to the section and you'll be like, oh, what about this? This is, this great book I read here. This is what it's about. And then you have that immediacy where you can see if they're responding to it, or sometimes they'll just be like, and then sometimes you'll just get to that one where they're like, yes, I get it. And so that's, and good booksellers, like, and our booksellers have been so great at doing that. And it really requires sort of a love of literature. Like you have to be pretty well read to be able to. Sometimes people do come up with like random things. I remember someone asking me once for a book, they said, I really like dialogue. And so I want a book with great dialogue. And I thought that was such an interesting question, because I wouldn't have thought of, dialogue being the, like, what you're looking for. And so it made me sort of think outside my, I'm normally thinking like narrative or themes or style, but this, I was like, dialogue, that's really interesting. And so we found some things. And so we're like, okay, I know some things that have a lot of talking, so we'll go with that. But right now, like, while we're closed to the public, the super fun part of my job is doing holiday care packages, which we've been selling. And basically someone will purchase one and they'll fill out their interests or the interest of the person that they're giving it to. And then I get to do the book selling again. And so I get to look, like, sometimes the things will be totally like good dialogue. And so I'll get to like, okay, all right, I get to recommend books again. And so that's been, our holiday care packages have been like the saving, like the mentally like saving grace of this in crazy season.
Those sound so great. And just as a cue to our online audience, people can head to your website and do a holiday care package, right?
Yep, absolutely. You could do it right now. I'm packaging all week, so.
Yep, Newtonvillebooks.com.
Yep.
Tom, a question from the online audience. Just speaking of recommendations, we've got a couple of questions coming in from people who are watching. One of them is people just want to know what you're reading right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I just finished the new Elena Ferrante, which I thought was extraordinary. It's funny. I'm embarrassed to say I've not finished the Neapolitan trilogy, but I love Ferrante. The other books, Days of Abandonment, I think, is a masterpiece.
I love Days of Abandonment.
And this new one I just thought was really, I was talking to my daughter, who's like a huge fan of Ferrante, and I was just saying that she reminded me of Philip Roth in a certain way, because there's just this intelligence behind the fiction that I think defines the voice. There are some writers who are, I think, stylists, and then there are some writers who are just have such keen intelligences. And I was just thinking Ferrante is one of those writers where it allows for a certain level of honesty, I think. So there is an honesty. It's almost
painful.
So I finished that, and then I just started reading Brian Washington's Lot, which I'm really really enjoying as well. So those are the two recent ones, and that's all I can ever remember. For some reason, I have like short. It's like,
it's hard,
I have to go down to my bedside and look at the books and go, oh yes, I'm reading that and that.
But those are great recommendations. Brian Washington is someone I've been wanting to have on this program. Those are great recommendations. Mary, hand selling question for you. Obviously, the books that you are selling change from week to week and customer to customer. Do you have any go-tos? Do you have any that you just like always love to put in somebody's hand?
Yes, I absolutely do. And the other thing about that too is that usually our booksellers too will have go-tos. So if someone comes in and they're looking for something and it's not my area of expertise, I have so many ones that I can like pull on, because I know Nikki loved that, or Deb or Anne loved that. So it's super helpful in that way. But also I like my special go-tos. One of them is Richard Wagamese. Do you know him? He's a Canadian writer, and his book Indian Horse is like one of the most incredible books I've ever read, and most people don't know about it. It's published here by Milkweed, who does great things. They work with a lot of Indigenous writers and have really great diverse voices. And it's just, the writing is so beautiful. It's a coming of age set in Canada at like an Indian residential school where the children were forced to go. And a boy who falls in love with hockey and sort of discovers hockey as a way, sort of a way out. And it's funny because I'm not a sports person in any way. Really, I'll watch some baseball, but it's just, it's like the writing, it transcends, and even I can see like the beauty of hockey through this book. And so it's just one of those like special books that I feel like most people don't know, unless I've already told them about it, or one of my other booksellers. We had a bunch of booksellers who are big on him. And so that's one of my sort of like deep cuts that I can usually get to. But there's like, I love like most of Colson Whitehead's work are super easy to recommend, and it's helpful because people might be aware of an author's new book, but not necessarily the older ones. So I feel like I'm often going to an author's older works, because maybe they were just on the radar with this latest one, but they didn't realize they had multiple ones. So
Those are great recommendations. That's fabulous. Thank you.
mm-hmm.
Tom, another audience question. Our viewers are definitely readers, but many of them are also writers. Writing question for you. I'd like to hear about the process of adapting books to screen. Has being so involved in bringing books to life in this way changed the way that you write now? So has having done that adaptation a couple of times now changed your writing process and the way you write now?
Yeah, but only in the most counterintuitive way. In other words, I think when people ask that question, they think, oh, maybe that means you are writing your fiction as if it's already a movie or a TV show. And actually what's happened for me is that working in the two genres has made it very clear to me what the strengths of each one is. And so when I'm writing literary fiction now, I think it is deeper and more internal and more able to move in time than maybe some of my earlier work. In other words, I understand like, oh, that's a power I have as a fiction writer. I can do these like interior monologues and really get at what's happening under the surface for the character. Or I can, see an event in the context of a character's past in a way that's very hard to do when you're showing something on screen. And so I would actually say that my fiction writing has gotten more quote unquote literary because I understand, I think some of my early books, like if you read The Wishbones, which is that's going back quite a while, I think it reads almost with a kind of cinematic clarity and momentum. It's all in scenes and there's not a lot of flashing back and processing, and now I think if you compare that to something like Mrs. Fletcher, which is so much in the character's head, that's just something that has happened, and weirdly it makes for like challenging adaptations. Even though both The Leftovers and Mrs. Fletcher became TV shows, they were not easy books to adapt. They're not really set up for that. They're so I think it's what's made them interesting shows as well, because they require some adaptive skill.
Yeah,
it's like you get to participate in another way with your work. So
and it's why I've liked working with other people. TV shows are very collaborative, and to have a bunch of writers bring their perspective on the story and their personal anecdotes and experiences can just open up a kind of new way of thinking about it. So I don't think of adapting as a sort of one-to-one. I want, I mean, that's especially clear with something like The Leftovers. There's the book, and that's a certain experience. And the show is, just of an entirely different scope, and it reflects, Damon Lindelof's remarkable storytelling powers.
That's fascinating. Mary, sticking with this theme of talking to some of the writers out there, I'd love to talk a little bit about how authors engage with independent bookstores.
Sure.
I know when my first book was published, the advice I got was to get out and connect with all the indies and try to do events, and I did. I did the best I could, but I would love to hear. I'd love to hear in particular. Are there mistakes authors make in reaching out to you, and is there advice you would give to debut authors?
Yes, absolutely. One thing of advice that's super easy to do is engage, like before your book comes out, if you engage with bookstores on social media, then you're already going to be on their radar. And so then when, when this author comes and says, hey, my book is coming out, next month, and you'd be like, oh, right, I saw you liked that post I did about, and so I think that really goes a long way. It's an easy thing to do. And it really counts for a lot. The other thing that I feel like is a big thing that doesn't get taken advantage of so much is having your people pre-order your book from indie bookstores. So even if you've got a friend in Columbus or something, if they pre-order that, I know everybody it's easy to pre-order it on Amazon. But if you pre-order at that bookstore, then your book is on that bookstore's radar. Anytime someone special orders a book through me, I'm like, oh, what is this book that people are wanting? And so my bookseller, on bookseller mode, I'm like, okay, I know this book now, and it's on my radar. So I think so pre-ordering from indies is so important. You just spread it around everywhere, and I feel like that's so, like, if two people we get so few pre-orders that if two people pre-ordered a book, I'd be like, oh my goodness, these people know something I don't. And then I'd be like, well, I know I can sell it. If I can sell it to two people before it's even out, I'm going to be able to sell it to other people. So I think that's really helpful. Once everything is open again, one of the things is going into indie bookstores. It is good to talk with the people there, but the best way to do it, and not everybody can do this all the time, but if you're buying something and then you're telling me about your book, I am automatically listening. I'm oh, of course, this person just bought a book. I want to know what I'm like, I'm ready for it then. So I feel like that's also just great, if you come in. So sometimes authors at that point will have their bookmarks or flyers or something, and so that's just, you've put us in the perfect mode for that. Like, yes, give us your stuff, we like you.
It's such great advice. It's such great advice. It can feel so opaque from the author's side, and
I'm sure,
and
I feel, and it also changed, like some stores have different, like, look at what your indie bookstore is doing and how they're like, and try and respond to them that way. But yeah, it's a tough thing to crack, and so until you ask, you don't really know like what the best way to do things.
But it's great to know that the bookstores are sort of noticing the social media and noticing.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
awesome. If someone says something nice to me on social media, they're like my new best friend. I'm like, oh great, I know this person. They said they shared, they like that. So
love it. This interview series exists because of COVID, because we're trying to support independent bookstores during COVID. I have a couple of specific questions. Tom, I'm going to bring this to you, and I'm going to tie my question with another one coming in from the audience. I wanted to ask you just what your writing life has been during COVID, and whether you've been able to be creative and productive, and just tied to that, someone in the audience would love to know what you're working on now, if you're talking about that.
Yeah, I won't give any details, but I'm well into a new novel, and I started it. I actually went back and checked my files. I started it on December 12th of last year, so I've been working on it for a year, and in a way that was the perfect time, because when the lockdown hit, it wasn't like I didn't have something underway. And it was actually really comforting, I think, in the strange early days, to be able to go up to my room in the morning and work and have that bit of normal routine. Because like every novelist I know, you really have to be a creature of routine to get a novel done, because it's so much about just, chipping away every day, and getting a sense of what it is. And so, I mean, it's been a terrible time in many ways, and an anxious time, and a tragic time, and an infuriating time. The upside for me has been I can't remember the last any time in my life when I've had so little to do besides my work. This is like a big event in my week. so happens. But it's been I've understood writing as a kind of a, people talk about this as a practice, as a kind of a process, something that's been very comforting to me, because so many other things in my life have, and everybody's lives have not been comforting in this period.
Yeah.
So it's been a real bright side for me, which is it has felt productive. And I know that's been hard for a lot of people. Like, my kids are grown, and in fact, my grown daughter is living with us. I can't imagine what it would be like to have small kids at home and have to, I don't think I can imagine how productivity would happen in that. But I have, just because of the circumstances of my life right now, I sometimes travel to New Jersey to spend time with my elderly mother. That it's the only real, other obligation that I feel besides, writing this book and helping to cook dinner and getting some exercise. It's like my life has really been purified.
Yeah.
Down to the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. The basics, the essentials. Mary, in a few moments, I'm going to ask you, just in brass tacks, what people can do to support Newtonville during COVID. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about book selling at a time like this. I mean, what do people want to read? What books have been in demand? I mean, what do you think people look for at a time like this?
Yeah. I think, well, sort of the Obama book we've sold, 1 million of. So, but that's an event that's different. It was, in any context, we would have sold 1 million of them. But one of the things that I didn't quite think about until I was getting ready for this is that what we're selling a lot of, that we normally wouldn't be, is a lot of nature books. And so, like, connection to nature books. So many people, so while I'm doing these holiday care packages, people include notes like, this is for my son who, and I'm getting a lot of them that are like, this is for my son who is a doctor who is extremely stressed out, and we're hoping, maybe something nature-y. And so there are like the Hidden Life of Trees and Braiding Sweetgrass and World of Wonders. And so I do think, like, one of the things people are looking for right now is some way to connect to the natural world in a way that calms them, reminds them of, sort of the bigger picture, and will hopefully maybe like get them out and allow them to de-stress. And so yes, so like we've definitely been seeing books about like walking, and so things that like that have been really big. And because there are, like, people are looking for things like that right now, when everything is so stressful. And if you can have a book that gives you some like World of Wonders, it's just this beautiful book, and it's got like beautiful pictures and short essays. And that makes me think of another thing too, that people generally don't ask for short stories. So people tend to like their novel readers, and unless you've been through maybe like an MFA program, or for some reason you were exposed to short stories, I think some people are intimidated by them. But now we've had many requests for short story collections
Oh, really?
because of attention spans. And so I've always recommended short stories for people who are busy, or people who maybe, aren't in the habit of sitting down for a couple hours with a book. And so I like think of short stories as like tapas, and so like you get like a little bite and it's great and
Yeah.
satisfying. And so I'm kind of excited that people now are like, they're like getting that, and it's like, oh good, you're open to short stories, fantastic, we'll
That's
find
so
them.
interesting. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Who are you? So we mentioned Brian Washington already, but who
Yeah.
who are you recommending for short story collections?
So I love Laura Vandenberg's new short story collection, I Hold a Wolf by the Ears.
Mhm.
That's fantastic. There, let's see. And of course, as you ask this, I'm like looking at my shelves. This is another thing when people, like when you were Tom, when you were saying you were trying to think of the books you were reading that you really loved, it makes such a difference when you're standing in the bookstore and you see
Right.
them in front of you. And you're like, yes.
Believe me.
You're just looking, and so often I'm like looking around for my stuff, and I'm like, where? The Best American Short Stories we've sold a ton of,
Mhm, mhm.
and it just like Jim Shepard is one of my favorite short story writers. I've been giving him to everybody. The book Bangkok Wakes to Rain is it's a collection of linked short stories, which is, I think, fantastic for the people who are maybe short story like worried and like maybe not ready for it. But like, here's linked short stories, and you'll love it.
I read a book that's I think marketed as a novel, The Cactus League,
Oh
um,
yes, right. It's marketed as a novel, but
but it
oh,
feels like a collection of linked
yep.
stories, and I thought that was a terrific book.
Yeah, and so that's like another one that's really good right now, because it has sort of like an overarching sensibility maybe, but even like Visit from the Goon Squad, I
Mm,
It
is,
feels like that, yeah.
kind of a story collection, but reads like a novel. So
yeah, absolutely. If we're recommending short story collections, I'll put in a plug for my friend Brad Felver and Dogs of Detroit,
oh
which
yeah,
won the Drew Hines last year and is a great short story collection. So
love it.
Now,
great.
I'll put in a plug for another Brad, that sadly the late Brad
Oh
Watson,
yes,
who has a couple story collections. Last Days of the
I
Dogman.
love Brad Watson. He's such a
And he's a
great
writer I wanted to
writer.
bring up because I met him through Newtonville Books. I came to a reading in the early days when Tim Huggins was the
Mhm.
owner, and I was
Yeah.
introduced to Brad, who turned out to be one of the great American writers of my
Ah,
generation. And
rest in
sadly,
peace. I know.
he passed this year, but I highly recommend all his books, and including the most recent Miss Jane, which
Miss
was
Jane.
just a exquisite novel that I think if anyone's looking for a really quiet,
Yeah.
deep novel in the tradition of the best sort of Southern writing tradition, with gorgeous prose and a
Yeah.
genuinely generous and moving view of humanity, check out Miss Jane by Brad Watson.
Yeah, that was great. The Heaven of Mercury is his novel that I love too. Brad Watson's just great. He was great.
That's great. We'll put those links in the chat so the audience can check those out. Um, Mary, we're going to start to run low on time. I have a question I wanted to give you as a bookseller.
Mhm.
Um, Fill in the blank for me. Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
I think part supportive community.
Yeah.
Like you really, none of us would be here if the people in the community didn't come in and buy their books and look to us as, places of connection, places for events, recommendations, just talking. I miss just talking to people. And so that's probably what the loss you feel the most right now, is that when I see people at curbside, sometimes I'm like, they've ordered a book and I'm getting it to them at the door with my mask on. And I'm like, this is a really great book. You did a good job. Like,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, good. And so you have these like brief moments of it, but we're blessed to be like Tom said too, the Boston area is a fantastic area for bookstores. And I think that helps us as I never really feel in competition with the other bookstores in the area, because we're all friends. They're all doing great, incredible work in different ways, like with their own specialties, and we're always like borrowing things from each other, and like we're all invested in everybody's health, like Harvard Bookstore and Porter Square, and Paper Cuts in JP, Wellesley Booksmith and Belmont. We want them all to succeed, because the more of us there are in this area, people are used to going to bookstores now because they have so many choices. It's great. Like, I love it. And so a couple times at Indie Bookstore Day, we would sort of organize and do a group thing together. One year there were buses that stopped at each bookstore. There were like 2 routes, and so you could get on the bus and you could go to 6 bookstores in like one day.
Yeah.
Which is just, when I first moved to Boston, and back then, there were sort of different bookstores here. It wasn't, we've had new ones come up, which is great. But when I came to Boston, there were so many bookstores, and as someone, I'm from the suburbs of Buffalo, and so we had a Barnes and Noble and a Borders growing up that were 30 minutes away from me, and then one indie down in the city, which is great, and a couple used bookstores too. But it wasn't until coming here that you see bookstores as sort of part of your everyday thing. And I think, that makes a difference when it's not just one place to go. It's like you've got all these different neighborhoods with their own bookstores, and new ones opening over the years. There's a new one opening on Charles Street down in Beacon Hill, which I'm super excited about. I think they were supposed to open this year, but COVID. So I think it's, next, but I think we're all just happy to see more bookstores in the area. And
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you mentioned community, and I mean, Tom, you kind of opened us up talking about, the community that you find at independent bookstores. I mean, one thing that I think is interesting is, I mean, I read your bio at the top of the show. I mean, you've certainly reached a point where your work is extremely well known. I think it's, I mean, fair to say that you're probably one of the most read and appreciated, modern American authors. And yet it seems like you still really value that connection to your local bookstores, to the local indies near where you live. That still gives you something that's important to you in your literary life.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because sometimes you'd be like, oh, I've been to so many readings, but one of the things that's happened, especially with Newtonville, is always a kind of a feeling of like, I'm going to go there, I'm going to see in the audience, a dozen people that I know, but not know so well that I'll, we'll be inviting each other to our homes, right? But it's more like literary acquaintances. Like there's this network of people, and some of them I've seen at Newtonville book events over, the past 20 years. And so there is, just something really gratifying about feeling part of a community, and there are, there's a wonderful writer who lives in Newton, Jonathan Wilson, who I love his work, and Jonathan he's a friend, and he's a great personality and raconteur, and I love to see him read there, but I also just love to bump into him at the store and catch up with him, because he's such a charming guy. But he's almost like, I mean, he's a writer friend, but he's also like very specifically like a Newtonville book friend.
I like that. And that too makes me think of, back to your question about what authors, like new authors can do. Go to events when you can go to events. And what Tom's saying is true. It, like, the writers in Boston are so supportive of other writers in Boston. And so many times when we have an event, we'll see like 5 or 6 other local writers who maybe have read here or maybe will someday. And we see them in the audience, and like, that's fantastic. Like, that is so happy to see. And I love seeing writers support each other, and seeing, bodies in chairs and at a reading.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Tom used the phrase literary acquaintances, and I think that's such a
Mhm.
great phrase. I mean, I miss my literary acquaintances so
Right.
much.
I know.
And, and I miss that feeling of just kind of walking into a reading and sitting down and spotting.
Yep.
Tom says, I mean, a half dozen people who,
Yeah.
came to my launch and I'm going to their reading.
Yep.
And there's a sense of reciprocity, there's a sense of
Yeah.
mutual support and care.
Mhm.
And it's,
Yeah, one of the other nice things I see at the store often are just people with their kids,
yeah.
and you get this feeling of like, oh, okay, this is like a intergenerational thing,
Right.
and you really do feel like, okay, there are these new readers and they're coming out,
Oh,
and
it's so true.
I
Yeah.
have to often choose my readings accordingly.
Totally. It's our reading area sometimes is, our store is small, so you can be right next to the kids section. And so often an author will sort of like, they've heard a small child go through, and so they'll just pause for a second and make sure
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
can go forward.
I mean, it's all part of the experience. It's so
Right.
great. It's so
Mhm.
great. Mary,
Mhm.
tell the audience what to do. What can we do to support Newtonville Books right now during the holiday season?
Well, first of all, I thank you for having me. But also, everyone, you can also support, even if you're supporting your local independent bookstore. That's like a win for me too. So, so first of all, like if you've got a local store that's right nearby, they're still going to be able to get you books, gift certificates, whatever their hours are. Check it out and go there. What we're doing now, the things that we can get done. You sort of, if you're trying to order a book now, it's not going to be here by Christmas. We're at the 26th. And so, but we have plenty of books in. And so on our website, if you go to newtonvillebooks.com, you can see books that we have in the store. Plus, we're doing a ton of the care packages, which are nice. So if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you just tell us about your person and we will find books for them. Also, gift certificates are just amazing. They're nice and easy, and everybody loves a gift certificate. I know sometimes people, they're like, well, I want to give them something more than a gift certificate. But especially with kids, when you see a kid walk in the door with a gift certificate, you've like given them the world. Like they're just so thrilled. And so gift certificates are amazing. Every bookstore will be able to get you gift certificates right now. And then you can come when we're open. Most of them, you can use them online too in some way, but it's like, it's a nice promise to the bookstore that you will be back.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And people can go to newtonvillebooks.com to pick all of that up.
Absolutely.
Do curbside pickup with you as well as delivery.
We do. We'll be here till the 23rd, managing at the door. So
Fabulous. Fabulous. Everybody needs to do it. Thank you both so much for taking the time to be with me. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you both. To the audience, this has been the 37th independent bookstore that we have featured on this program during 2020. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for supporting these bookstores. Thank you to my friend and partner and producer and co-host, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, for doing this with me. This is our last broadcast of 2020. We will be here on January 6th with Chris Poljalian, with I think several of his favorite bookstores in Vermont. So that is going to be fabulous. Please join us for that. Thank you both. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. Please be safe. Please buy books. Please keep reading.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joe and Kimberly and Tom, for doing this. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays. Absolutely.
Happy holidays. Thank you.